Dawn broke pale and uncertain over the fields of northern France. The air was cool, filled with the faint smell of rain and distant engines. Farmers paused in silence as the hum grew louder, first a tremor, then a roar. Shadows appeared across the sky, hundreds of them. German bombers, their wings glinting in the early light, crossed the Meuse River in perfect formation. From Luxembourg to the Dutch border, the earth began to shake. Bridges were destroyed, roads torn apart, and phone lines cut. Columns of smoke rose over small towns that had known only quiet mornings a day before. In Belgian villages, people stood frozen in disbelief, watching black crosses sweep above them. For the soldiers of France, Britain, and Belgium, the moment had come. The phony war, that strange 8 months of uneasy calm, was over in an instant. Europe's quiet front erupted into motion, a storm of steel and fire, sweeping westward faster than anyone imagined possible. It was the dawn of the Battle of France. The thunder in the sky was only the beginning, and beneath it, the fate of a continent was about to be decided. Europe in early 1940 stood on a knife's edge. The fall of Poland in just 5 weeks had stunned the world. German panzers, Stuka dive bombers, and fast moving infantry had carved through defences that were supposed to last months. Britain and France had declared war in response, but after the guns fell silent in Poland, the Western Front remained eerily quiet. This uneasy pause would be remembered as the phony war. Behind the French Maginot line, soldiers waited in trenches that felt more like relics from 1918 than the threshold of a new kind of conflict. The French army was large, proud, and heavily equipped, but it was built for a different war, one of attrition and defense. Generals still believed in the lessons of Verdun: static lines, strong fortifications, and deliberate planning. Across the border, in Germany, a different philosophy was taking shape. The Wehrmacht, led by bold commanders like Heinz Guderian and Erich von Manstein, envisioned speed, coordination, and surprise as their greatest weapons. Tanks would no longer be used merely as infantry support. They would strike deep, independent, and fast. The Luftwaffe would shatter enemy morale from above, while mobile troops encircled and destroyed what remained. By spring 1940, Adolf Hitler approved Fall Gelb Case Yellow, the invasion of France and the Low Countries. But the plan had changed dramatically after initial versions, leaked through a German aircraft accident in Belgium. Manstein proposed something radical. Rather than attacking directly through Belgium, where the Allies expected the main blow, the Germans would feint north while driving their true spearhead through the Ardennes forest terrain the French considered impassable to tanks. The French plan Dial relied on this expectation. As soon as Germany invaded Belgium, Allied forces, including the British Expeditionary Force, would advance north to meet them. It was a plan built on assumptions that the main German thrust would come where it had in 1914, and that France's own fortified lines would hold the rest. In reality, 135 divisions of the German army were preparing to move through the heart of the Ardennes. Bridges were reinforced, traffic was timed to the minute, and entire columns of armor crept through narrow forest roads under cover of darkness. The sound of engines was muffled, the radio silence absolute. By the time the Allies realized what was happening, the Germans would already be crossing the Meuse River. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the balance of Europe. The coming weeks would see courage and chaos, strategy and failure, and the birth of a word that would define modern warfare: Blitzkrieg. And amid the clash of armies, millions of lives, soldiers and civilians alike, would be swept into a storm they could neither predict nor control. The Battle of France was not one story, but many, each seen through different eyes, each revealing a side of the same catastrophe. The human perspective for the French and Belgian civilians, the war arrived like a nightmare, unannounced. One morning they woke to the shriek of sirens and the low growl of aircraft. Families fled with what they could carry: bicycles, prams, livestock forming endless columns along the dusty roads. Soldiers trying to advance toward the front found those same roads jammed with refugees, slowing their movement, spreading confusion. Entire villages emptied overnight. leaving only echoing church bells and open doors swinging in the wind. For the ordinary soldier, fear was constant, but so was disbelief. French infantrymen, many veterans of 1918, fought bravely yet often without understanding where the enemy truly was. Orders changed by the hour, communication lines broke, rumors raced faster than the tanks. In the faces of the young, one could see both courage and a dawning realization that the old world they were defending was already slipping away. The tactical perspective the German assault was unlike anything the world had seen. Instead of a slow, grinding campaign, it was movement coordinated, precise, merciless. At its core was the concept of Schwerpunkt, the focal point concentrating overwhelming force on one narrow sector to break through, then exploiting that breach relentlessly. At Sedan over the Meuse, Guderian's Roman 19 Panzer Corps demonstrated this doctrine perfectly. Stukas screamed down on French positions in waves, blasting bunkers and artillery. Within hours, German engineers had thrown bridges across the river under fire. Tanks followed immediately, ignoring enemy fire, pushing west before French reinforcements could react. It was shock and speed married together, the art of keeping the opponent perpetually off balance. The Allies, trained for slow mobilization and deliberate defense, could not comprehend it at first. Their counterattacks were scattered, uncoordinated. Where the French saw battle lines, the Germans saw fluid opportunity. The difference in mindset was fatal. The technological perspective on paper, the Allies had more tanks and often better armoured ones. The French Char B-1 and the British Matilda could outgun most German panzers in a direct duel. But technology alone does not win wars, how it is used does. The German tanks fought as a system. Each unit carried radios, allowing instant communication across formations. Air and ground forces worked in harmony, with reconnaissance guiding Stukas and artillery in real time. Meanwhile, many French units lacked radios altogether. Orders travelled slowly, sometimes by motorcycle courier. It was this networked coordination, not superior machines, that gave the Wehrmacht its edge. Every strike was supported, every move anticipated. The result was the illusion of invincibility, a mechanical tide rolling forward without pause. The leadership perspective at the top, the contrast was stark. In France, aging generals such as Maurice Gamelin directed the war from distant headquarters outside Paris. Communication was formal, rigid, often disconnected from the pace of events. Decisions took hours, sometimes days, to reach the front. In Germany, field commanders like Guderian and Rommel operated with autonomy. They were trusted to act on initiative, to push boundaries, to exploit openings instantly. Even Hitler, though cautious at times, allowed his armoured spearheads a degree of freedom that shocked his own general staff. In London, Winston Churchill had only just become Prime Minister. Watching from across the Channel, he sensed the scale of the unfolding disaster and prepared Britain for the possibility of standing alone. The moral and psychological perspective as the German advance deepened, morale crumbled faster than armies. The French people, long convinced of their army's strength, found themselves betrayed by speed and confusion. Entire divisions melted away, not for lack of bravery, but because the rhythm of war had changed beyond recognition. For the Germans, victory seemed proof of destiny, evidence that the humiliation of Versailles was finally avenged. Propaganda films showed disciplined columns and cheering crowds, while behind them towns burned and prisoners marched into captivity. War had become psychological. The fall of one fortress or one city mattered less than the spreading belief that resistance was useless. And once that belief took hold, it moved faster than any tank. From human despair to tactical brilliance, from leadership paralysis to technological revolution, all these threads converged at one place, one moment of irreversible breakthrough. That moment came at the river Meuse, near the quiet French town of Sedan. Sedan, May 13, 1940. The Meuse River glimmered under the grey morning sky, its banks steep and heavily fortified. The French believed it impassable. For decades, their defence plans had assumed that any major German attack would come farther north, through Belgium. Here, along the Meuse, Reserve Units the 55th Infantry Division manned the line. They were older men, poorly equipped, and unprepared for what was coming. At 8:00 a.m., the Luftwaffe struck. Over 1:00 Stuka dive bombers descended in relentless waves. The noise was beyond human comprehension, a continuous, screaming roar that tore the air apart. Every trench, bunker, and artillery position along the river was engulfed in smoke and dust. The bombardment lasted hours, breaking both defences and morale. When it ended, silence returned only for moments before the tanks appeared. Guderian's panzers surged forward. German engineers, working under fire, erected pontoon bridges across the Meuse. By the afternoon, the first tanks were rolling over. French artillery tried to respond, but coordination was lost. Many units retreated in disorder. Communication with higher command collapsed entirely. Within 24 hours, the line at Sedan, the key to France's defence, had been breached. From that single point, the German armour fanned out like a flood, breaking through a dam. Rommel's 7th Panzer Division advanced so rapidly that even German headquarters struggled to track it. Town after town fell, and behind them came the infantry to consolidate. The Allies, still committed to pushing north into Belgium, found their right flank exposed. On May 20, German tanks reached the channel near Abbeville. In just 10 days, the Wehrmacht had sliced through northern France, trapping the British Expeditionary Force and much of the French First Army in a vast pocket around Dunkirk. The unthinkable had happened. France, the strongest land power in Europe, had been cut in two. In Berlin, Hitler could hardly believe the reports. In Paris, panic spread. Commanders argued over counterattacks that never materialized. And in the coastal winds of northern France, hundreds of thousands of soldiers looked toward the sea, waiting for rescue or surrender. The Battle of France had reached its decisive turning point. What followed was not a fight for victory but for survival. By early June 1940, the Allied position in France had collapsed. Dunkirk, once seen as a temporary port of retreat, became a desperate symbol of salvation. Between May 26 and June 4, under the cover of smoke and relentless German bombardment, an improvised armada of over 800 vessels, naval ships, fishing boats, ferries, and private yachts crossed the English Channel. They carried home more than 338,000 soldiers, British and French alike. It was a miracle of endurance, but it could not save France. The German drive resumed almost immediately after Dunkirk's evacuation. On June 10, Italy declared war on France, striking from the south. 4 days later, German forces entered Paris. The French government, fragmented and exhausted, fled to Bordeaux. On June 17, Marshal Philippe Pétain announced that France would seek an armistice. 6 days later, on June 22, in the same railway carriage where Germany had signed its 1918 surrender, France signed hers. The humiliation was complete. Germany divided the country, the occupied north and west under direct control, and the so-called Free Zone. Under Pétain's collaborationist Vichy regime, Britain now stood alone, its army saved but its ally defeated. The speed of the German victory shocked the world. In just 6 weeks, France, a nation with one of the largest armies in Europe, had been broken. The age of Blitzkrieg had arrived, rewriting every assumption about modern warfare. The echoes of that collapse would shape the next 5 years of the war and the fate of millions. The Battle of France was more than a military defeat, it was the end of an era. In 6 weeks, centuries of confidence in static defense, in sheer numbers, in the idea that courage alone could hold a line, were erased. Speed, coordination, and psychological shock had replaced endurance as the new measure of power. For Germany, it was the height of triumph but also the beginning of hubris. For Britain, it was the warning that survival would demand adaptation, innovation, and unyielding resolve. And for France, it marked the start of occupation, division, and resistance. The fall of France changed the face of the Second World War. It taught the world that modern war belonged to those who could think faster than they could march. And in the ruins of 1940, the future of Europe began to take shape, forged in defeat and learned in fire.